You think your Airbnb rental is safe? These 6 people were dead within hours of checking in. Their luxury getaways turned into graves because of hidden engineering failures and amateur mistakes. Physics doesn't care about your booking or your vacation plan. Today, we analyze the 6 most shocking vacation rental deaths. Warning, these aren't just accidents. These are cold, preventable cases where human negligence killed the guest. August 2009. The blistering afternoon heat radiated intensely off the terracotta tiles of a secluded Tuscan rental villa. The dry Italian air carried the heavy, intoxicating scent of crushed pine needles, warm dust, and distant vineyards. It was an environment perfectly engineered for absolute, luxurious silence. 42-year-old Michael, a corporate executive, sought a momentary escape from the relentless, noisy grind of his daily life. His only objective for this sweltering afternoon was a peaceful hour of deep rest. He carried a heavy-duty double-stitch canvas hammock out onto the wide stone terrace. The grand terrace was beautifully framed by 2 massive, imposing anchors. On the left side stood a centuries-old oak tree, its thick bark practically turned to iron by time. On the right side stood a towering, majestic Roman-style column. It looked exactly like a heavy monolith carved from solid, ancient marble. It projected an aura of absolute, immovable stability. But this was a fatal architectural illusion. The beautiful villa was a recent, hastily completed cosmetic renovation. That grand Roman pillar was nothing more than a cheap, hollow stage prop. It was a fake shell constructed from low-grade brick, brittle mortar, and decorative white plaster. It contained absolutely no internal steel rebar core to anchor it safely to the concrete patio floor. It was built strictly to look expensive for wealthy tourists. It was totally incapable of bearing any horizontal, structural load. Michael, trusting his eyes and the illusion of wealth, assumed he was looking at solid stone. He wrapped the thick, green nylon strap securely around the ancient oak tree. He then walked across the sun-baked tiles to the fake white pillar. He looped the second heavy strap around its thick, textured plaster waist. He pulled the steel carabiner tight and tested the setup with a firm, confident, downward tug. The column did not budge a single millimeter. It felt perfectly rigid to his touch. Michael carefully sat on the edge of the thick canvas fabric. The material groaned slightly under his weight. He leaned back, lifted his bare feet off the hot ground, and settled deeply into the center. Then, to get a comfortable swing going, he pushed off the ground with a sharp, heavy thrust of his leg. That single mundane movement sealed his fate. The hidden mechanics of a hammock involve extreme, deceptive physics. This is the invisible danger of lateral tension. A tightly hung hammock does not just pull straight down with the weight of its human occupant. Because of the shallow horizontal angle of the suspension ropes, the downward force of gravity is multiplied into a massive horizontal pulling force. A 200-pound man does not apply 200 pounds of downward pressure to the anchor point. Instead, he acts like a powerful mechanical winch. He unknowingly applies nearly 400 pounds of violent sideways leverage directly to the top of the unreinforced pillar. In a split second, the hidden physics took over. The sudden horizontal shock wave traveled down the tight nylon strap at lightning speed. The fabric violently bit into the soft plaster surface. Inside the hollow column, the cheap, unreinforced mortar instantly gave way. A microscopic fracture raced entirely around the decorative base in a fraction of a second. The structural failure was absolute, silent, and immediate. The towering 300-kilogram masonry pillar did not slowly tip over. It snapped at its weak foundation like a dry twig. The immense lateral force of the hammock ripped the entire structure violently off its base. Gravity instantly took command of the dead weight. Michael had less than half a second to register the massive, dark shadow suddenly eclipsing the bright Italian sun. The heavy cylindrical weight collapsed inward. It perfectly followed the fatal, high-tension trajectory of the nylon strap. It plummeted straight down toward the center of the trapped canvas bed. The massive masonry structure impacted directly across Michael's upper chest with extreme kinetic speed. The physical reality of the collision was clinically catastrophic. A 300-kilogram solid object falling from a standing height generates thousands of pounds of kinetic energy upon impact. The massive blunt force trauma was immediately fatal. The extreme mechanical crush injury caused an instant and total structural failure of the chest cavity. The sudden, immense physical pressure forced his heart into an immediate, irreversible halt. It was a completely non-survivable transfer of raw kinetic energy. His central nervous system shut down entirely before his conscious brain could even process the sensation of pain or panic. A thick cloud of white plaster dust violently erupted into the still air. It slowly drifted over the sun-baked terracotta tiles, coating the beautiful patio in a fine, ghostly gray film. The cicadas hidden in the old oak tree continued their rhythmic, buzzing song, completely undisturbed by the sudden, violent thud. The canvas hammock now lay completely pinned to the ground beneath a massive mountain of shattered faux marble. The blind pursuit of perfect aesthetic luxury had successfully engineered a beautifully disguised, entirely inescapable trap. August 2012. The automated motorized pool cover is a modern marvel of residential engineering. It consists of sleek, interlocking extruded aluminum slats designed to glide silently over the water. It rolls along a concealed underwater track like a massive, horizontal steel garage door. It is carefully designed to keep out autumn leaves, retain expensive, heated water, and symbolize effortless wealth. But mechanical convenience always demands a flawless operating environment. 29-year-old David was a guest at a sprawling, elite rental villa on a warm summer evening. The backyard air smelled heavily of expensive sunscreen, chlorine, and distant barbecue smoke. David sought a brief moment of sensory deprivation away from the loud party music. He dove cleanly into the deep end of the 10-foot basin. He loved the weightless, muted isolation found beneath the surface. He swam along the smooth bottom, holding his breath to enjoy the cool, blue silence. He was completely blind to the critical architectural flaw hidden inside the house. The property owner had prioritized a clean, minimalist aesthetic above all basic safety protocols. Because of this, the control panel for the heavy pool mechanisms was installed deep inside the living room. It was completely hidden behind a sleek, unmarked wooden cabinet door. From this indoor location, there was absolutely no line of sight to the outdoor water. You could not see the pool while operating the heavy machinery. The hidden danger lay within the mechanism of the motor itself. Automated moving systems usually require basic safety fail-safes. A standard electric garage door possesses optical sensors that instantly reverse the motor if an object breaks the invisible laser beam. This highly expensive European pool cover, however, ran on a dumb, continuous torque industrial winch. It completely lacked any resistance sensors. Once activated, the powerful motor would blindly pull the heavy metal slats across the water until they firmly locked into the far stone wall. It did not care what was floating in the way. It would never reverse, and it would not stop. Inside the house, another party guest, slightly disoriented from the evening drinks, began searching for the patio lighting controls. The sun was dipping lower. He opened the sleek wooden cabinet in the hallway. He stared at an unmarked, heavy-duty metal toggle switch. Assuming it controlled the outdoor floodlights, he firmly flipped the switch into the down position. He waited for a bright light to illuminate the lawn. When absolutely nothing happened, he simply walked away, leaving the live switch fully engaged. Outside, the silent, heavy-duty electric motor immediately woke up. The thick aluminum panels began to slide rapidly across the surface of the water. They clicked smoothly and rhythmically as they interlocked. Down in the deep end, David slowly exhaled a stream of silver bubbles. He felt his lungs begin to burn slightly with the natural buildup of carbon dioxide. It was time to surface and breathe. He kicked his strong legs, angling his body sharply upward toward the light. He looked up through the stinging chlorine, expecting to see the fading colors of the twilight sky. Instead, a terrifying artificial eclipse was rapidly sliding over his entire world. The water above him was quickly turning into solid black metal. He swam desperately faster, reaching his hand up for the rapidly shrinking sliver of daylight. The heavy metal sheet moved with relentless, perfectly calibrated industrial speed. David's fingertips successfully breached the surface. They touched the cold, wet aluminum edge just as it glided mercilessly past his face. The final metal panel locked securely into the stone, coping with a heavy, definitive metallic thud. The open pool was instantly transformed into a sealed, pitch-black concrete vault. The rigid aluminum cover was engineered to support the heavy weight of winter snow or a wandering animal. It would never yield to human hands pushing up from below. David violently pressed his open palms against the unyielding, slippery metal ceiling. The human survival instinct instantly triggered a massive, uncontrollable adrenaline dump into his bloodstream. This biological panic response immediately consumed his rapidly depleting oxygen supply at double the normal rate. The frantic, exhausting physical exertion in a perfectly sealed underwater environment led to rapid, unavoidable hypoxia. Carbon dioxide rapidly saturated his bloodstream. This created an overwhelming, agonizing neurological demand to inhale air. Panic relentlessly accelerated the fatal biological clock. When the human brain is entirely starved of oxygen, the autonomic respiratory reflex takes over completely. It entirely bypasses all conscious control. His mouth opened involuntarily in the dark water. The pool water aggressively flooded his airway. The complete lack of oxygenated blood caused a rapid neurological shutdown. The heart, severely deprived of oxygen, instantly entered cardiac arrest. The outcome was a silent, tragic, mechanical asphyxiation, completely hidden from the cheerful reality above. Above the water, the upbeat party music continued to play loudly into the warm night. The aluminum pool cover rested perfectly flat. It was a flawless, unbroken plane of brushed metal reflecting the dying sun. Inside the silent house, the unmarked toggle switch remained firmly locked in the down position. The blind, automated machine had performed its single assigned task flawlessly. It had efficiently turned a luxury oasis into a permanent, inescapable trap, while the world around it blindly celebrated the beautiful summer evening. April 2012. 26-year-old Mark was an energetic tourist chasing the ultimate viral vacation video. Deep inside Costa Rica, the dense rainforest canopy hummed with the sound of distant howler monkeys. The tropical air was thick, heavily saturated with moisture and the smell of decaying wood. He had rented an exclusive treehouse suspended high above a jagged rocky river gorge. His primary goal for the afternoon was to capture a thrilling, fast-paced shot of his exotic adventure. The only way to reach the wooden cabin was a swaying 60-foot suspension bridge spanning the terrifying drop. A proper suspension bridge built over a fatal height must always rely on thick galvanized steel cables. High tensile steel ignores harsh weather, extreme humidity, and time. But the property owner made a deliberately cheap aesthetic choice. To enhance the rustic jungle illusion for wealthy tourists, he bypassed modern engineering entirely. Instead, he used thick, decorative natural hemp rope for the primary load-bearing lines. Hemp is an organic plant fiber. It is highly susceptible to the violent environmental extremes of a tropical jungle. Months of relentless, baking equatorial sun had completely dehydrated the natural fibers. Repeated daily cycles of heavy rain, followed by scorching heat, quietly destroyed the rope's internal structural integrity. The hidden threat lay exactly at the main anchor point. The main rope was tightly wrapped directly around the rough, abrasive bark of a massive mahogany tree. The dried fibers resting against this rough surface were incredibly brittle and fundamentally unstable. Mark stood confidently at the edge of the wooden departure platform. He held his action camera tightly, the red recording light already blinking. He wanted a highly dynamic tracking shot to impress his audience. He did not test the bridge with a slow, careful step. Instead, he took a deep breath and launched his body forward into a full sprint. He pounded his heavy, stiff-soled hiking boots forcefully onto the widely spaced wooden planks. Every single running step generated violent, unpredictable kinetic energy. The fundamental physics of a suspension bridge drastically amplify moving weight. An aggressively running human creates severe, cascading, bouncing shock waves throughout the entire structure. These intense mechanical shock waves traveled instantly down the tight hemp lines. They went directly to the main anchor knot. The violent bouncing created extreme, rapid dynamic friction against the incredibly rough tree bark. The dehydrated hemp fibers could not absorb the sudden mechanical stress. Deep inside the thick knot, hundreds of microscopic organic threads began to silently snap. It sounded exactly like the quiet tearing of thick canvas. This noise was completely masked by the loud thudding of Mark's heavy boots. Mark proudly reached the exact center of the 60-foot span. He was suspended directly over the dry, rocky riverbed far below. At that precise fraction of a second, the fundamental tensile limit of the dead plant matter was violently exceeded. The primary right-side load-bearing rope suffered a catastrophic, complete structural failure. It snapped with an incredibly loud, sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot across the quiet gorge. The sudden asymmetric loss of tension immediately destroyed the bridge's delicate physical equilibrium. The entire walkway violently flipped 180 degrees upside down in less than half a second. Gravity instantly took absolute control of the situation. Mark had absolutely no time to react or grab the remaining handrail. He was thrown cleanly from the spinning wooden planks directly into the empty, humid air. The physical reality of the 50-foot plunge was entirely unforgiving and mathematically precise. A heavy human body in uninterrupted freefall accelerates rapidly toward the earth. The resulting impact against the jagged, solid granite boulders of the dry riverbed was clinically catastrophic. The sudden, massive deceleration generated overwhelming kinetic trauma across his entire skeletal structure. The extreme blunt force impact caused an immediate, total structural failure of the cervical spine. His central nervous system underwent an instantaneous, completely irreversible shutdown. The catastrophic mechanical trauma forced his heart into immediate cardiac arrest. It was a perfectly non-survivable transfer of kinetic energy. He lost consciousness permanently before his conscious brain could even begin to process the terrifying sensation of falling. High above the silent gorge, the violently frayed hemp rope dangled uselessly in the warm breeze. Its torn ends slowly untwisted under the hot tropical sun. Down below, the small plastic action camera rested completely safely on a soft patch of bright green moss. Its tiny red light continued to blink steadily. It recorded nothing but the quiet, uncaring rustle of the ancient, indifferent jungle canopy. May 2010. The cool ocean breeze swept aggressively up the sheer, rocky face of the Pacific coastline. The salty air was crisp and constantly moving. It carried the rhythmic, crashing sound of heavy surf pounding against the jagged coastal stones far below. 35-year-old James was a charismatic host celebrating his birthday milestone. He was a proud, deeply confident man who loved entertaining a large crowd. He stood triumphantly on the expensive wooden deck of his cliffside home. His singular goal for the evening was to provide his closest friends with an unforgettable, luxurious experience, suspended directly above the roaring ocean. A cantilevered terrace hanging freely over a terrifying vertical drop is an extreme architectural challenge. To safely suspend heavy weight in midair, structural engineers rely on massive, threaded steel anchor bolts. These heavy-duty bolts must completely pierce the primary wooden load-bearing beams. They must lock deeply into the solid concrete foundation of the main house. A steel bolt creates an unbreakable mechanical lock that absolutely refuses to pull out under heavy stress. However, James had built this expansive new deck extension entirely by himself over the spring weekend. He possessed supreme confidence, but absolutely no formal engineering knowledge. To attach the primary structural beams directly to the flat exterior facade of his house, he made a catastrophic error. He completely ignored heavy steel bolts. Instead, he relied exclusively on hundreds of standard, smooth shank framing nails fired rapidly from a pneumatic nail gun. Smooth metal nails possess absolutely no mechanical locking threads. They rely entirely on the weak, microscopic friction generated between the smooth steel and the soft pine wood. They are perfectly fine for holding up lightweight indoor drywall. They are completely useless against massive outward pulling forces. To make matters infinitely worse, James proudly installed a massive, premium 6-person fiberglass jacuzzi. He placed it directly at the furthest, entirely unsupported edge of the suspended wooden deck. The evening sun dipped below the ocean horizon, painting the sky in deep orange hues. James cheerfully invited 5 of his closest friends to join him in the bubbling, steaming water. One by one, 6 full-grown adults climbed into the deep fiberglass tub. The physical reality of the situation rapidly escalated into a mathematical nightmare. Water is incredibly heavy. a large 6-person jacuzzi holds roughly 400 gallons. Add the heavy fiberglass shell, the thick wooden decking, and 6 adult humans. The total dead weight resting on the unsupported edge easily exceeded 2 full tons. Furthermore, the bubbling jets and the constant shifting of human bodies created relentless, undulating, dynamic waves. The heavy water sloshed aggressively back and forth. This turned the massive, static weight into a violent, shifting dynamic load. Underneath the heavy floorboards, the hidden physics quietly took over. Deep inside the wooden ledger board attached to the house facade, a microscopic process of mechanical failure began. The intense, downward leverage of the 2-ton hot tub transformed the horizontal deck into a giant pry bar. The intense outward pulling force easily overcame the weak friction of the smooth steel nails. One by one, in absolute silence, the shiny metal shanks began to slowly slide horizontally. They silently slipped out of the soft pine wood. Millimeter by millimeter, the microscopic gap between the house and the deck quietly widened. James laughed loudly, raising his glass in a toast over the steaming water. He was completely oblivious to the fatal geometry separating right beneath his bare feet. At precisely 8:15 in the evening, the final sheer strength of the remaining metal nails was violently exceeded. Dozens of steel shanks simultaneously bent downward. They aggressively popped out of the wood with a rapid, terrifying sequence of loud metallic cracks. The structural failure was absolute and mathematically perfect. The entire massive wooden terrace detached flawlessly and evenly from the vertical wall of the house. Gravity immediately claimed the massive 2-ton structure. The deck, the heavy water, and the 6 people did not tilt or sway. They simply dropped straight down into the darkening void. The heavy wooden platform plummeted violently through 50 feet of empty coastal air. The resulting impact against the jagged, solid granite boulders lining the ocean shore was clinically catastrophic. The instantaneous deceleration of over 4,000 pounds of falling mass generated non-survivable kinetic energy. The extreme blunt force trauma transferred directly through the splintering wooden deck and deeply into the human occupants. The immense physical shock wave caused immediate, catastrophic structural failure of their skeletal systems. The severe mechanical crush injuries forced their central nervous systems into an instantaneous, totally irreversible shutdown. It was a completely fatal kinetic transfer. It guaranteed absolute loss of consciousness before the icy ocean water even touched their skin. High above the violently crashing waves, the sheer cliff face stood perfectly silent. A perfectly clean, rectangular outline of bare white paint remained on the side of the house. It was neatly decorated with hundreds of bent, totally useless metal nails. Down below, the shattered white fiberglass shell of the expensive jacuzzi rested awkwardly among the sharp black rocks. The heavy, bubbling jets of the pump motor continued to hum blindly. They uselessly churned the cold, salty ocean water into a thick white foam under the pale moonlight. October 2007. The restored farmhouse perfectly blended modern luxury with rustic charm. Inside the spacious living room, the air smelled of fresh wood stain and hot coffee. The space was wide, warm, and deceptively safe. 33-year-old Mark was a weekend party guest. He was in a sudden, frantic rush to leave the crowded gathering. His only immediate goal was to quickly grab his jacket from his car parked outside. He walked briskly toward the main exit of the living room. This wide doorway was secured by a massive custom-built sliding barn door. It was a spectacular and trendy piece of interior design. The door was a solid, 9-foot-tall shield made entirely of heavy reclaimed oak timber. It hung freely from a thick, black iron rail mounted high on the white wall. This specific style of door relies on the simple physics of rolling mass. It glides along the top track using heavy-duty steel wheels. However, heavy-moving objects always require strict mechanical boundaries. A solid oak door of this size weighs nearly 450 pounds. When a heavy object is put into rapid motion, it generates immense kinetic energy. To stop this rolling momentum safely, the steel track must have thick metal stoppers. These stoppers act as critical emergency brakes at both ends of the rail. They physically block the heavy wheels from rolling off the metal edge. But the amateur property owner had made a fatal, silent oversight during the installation. He loved the clean, minimalist look of the raw iron rail. He completely failed to install the heavy safety stoppers at the ends of the track. The steel bar was just an open, entirely unrestricted path. Mark grabbed the thick iron handle with his right hand. Because he was in a severe hurry, he did not slide the door gently. He planted his feet firmly and yanked the heavy oak shield aggressively to the side. He pulled with the full, sudden force of his entire body weight. This single violent action transferred massive momentum into the heavy wood. The heavy door rapidly accelerated along the smooth iron track, gaining massive momentum in a fraction of a second. The hidden mechanical failure was now unstoppable. The heavy steel wheels silently reached the absolute end of the iron rail. There was no metal stopper to halt their rapid forward progress. The fast-moving wheels simply rolled off the flat edge into empty space. The massive sliding door instantly lost its only upper point of structural support. The extreme inertia of the heavy wood forced the top edge to pitch violently forward away from the wall. 450 pounds of solid oak began to tip rapidly downward. Gravity seized absolute control of the dead weight. Mark barely had time to look up. He only registered a massive dark shadow collapsing toward him. He had absolutely no time to step backward out of the wide impact zone. The gigantic wooden shield fell perfectly flat. It slammed directly onto Mark, driving him violently backward onto the rigid hardwood floor. The physical reality of the heavy collision was clinically devastating. The sudden blunt force trauma transferred immense kinetic energy directly into his torso. The enormous weight pinned his body completely flat against the unyielding ground. The perfect flush seal between the flat door and the flat floor created an inescapable mechanical trap. The crushing static weight immediately overpowered the delicate muscles of his chest cavity. His ribs were physically locked in a totally compressed state. He was entirely unable to expand his lungs to draw in a single breath. The extreme mechanical pressure caused immediate, severe hypoxia. The rapid lack of oxygenated blood forced a total neurological shutdown. His heart quickly entered an irreversible cardiac arrest. It was a perfectly efficient, completely silent, mechanical asphyxiation. Above him, the modern farmhouse remained warmly lit and entirely peaceful. The loud party music continued to play cheerfully in the adjacent kitchen. The expensive designer barn door now rested completely flat on the floor. It functioned perfectly as a massive, immovable architectural tombstone. It permanently hid the fatal error of its own design while the party carried on blindly. July 2005, a massive pendulum swing suspended directly over an absolute void is a structure that demands flawless engineering. Deep in a remote tropical jungle, 28-year-old Sarah stood at the edge of a luxury eco-lodge terrace. She was a highly adventurous tourist seeking the ultimate feeling of total, unhindered freedom. The wooden terrace dropped off into a breathtaking, incredibly deep natural river canyon. Her immediate goal was to experience the thrill of this massive swing. The lodge owner had proudly built a beautiful, long wooden swing. It hung from a massive tree branch extending over the sharp cliff. To perfectly match the rustic, natural aesthetic of the resort, he avoided modern materials. He chose not to use highly reliable steel cables or synthetic climbing ropes. Instead, he used thick, authentic, natural hemp rope to suspend the heavy wooden seat. This was a catastrophic engineering decision for a wet tropical environment. Hemp is a highly porous, biological plant fiber. It constantly absorbs ambient moisture from the air like a giant sponge. Over the course of 12 months, relentless daily tropical downpours had thoroughly soaked the lines. The intense baking equatorial sun repeatedly dried only the outermost layer of the braided fibers. This cycle created a perfect, completely hidden incubator for organic decay. Deep inside the thick ropes, the dark, wet core had completely rotted away. It turned into a soft, useless mush. Only the dry, tough outer shell of the rope remained visually intact. It was a fatal, completely invisible structural illusion. Sarah sat confidently on the wide wooden plank. She tightly gripped the thick, dry ropes with both hands. She kicked her legs aggressively, pushing herself backward to gain serious momentum. A swing operates on the fundamental, unforgiving physics of a simple pendulum. At the highest point of the arc, the rider is momentarily weightless, but as the pendulum drops back down, gravity and rapid acceleration violently combine. At the exact bottom center of the swing, centrifugal force peaks violently. At this precise moment, the dynamic load on the ropes effectively doubles the static weight. Sarah pumped her legs harder, laughing loudly as she climbed higher into the humid air. She pushed the swing to its absolute maximum amplitude. She soared far out over the terrifying empty canyon. For a single weightless fraction of a second, she hung perfectly motionless at the extreme apex of her flight. Then gravity violently pulled her backward. The wooden seat accelerated rapidly down the steep, invisible curve of the pendulum arc. She hit the exact bottom of the curve at maximum velocity. The extreme centrifugal force instantly applied massive vertical tension to the primary suspension lines. The hollow, rotted core of the natural hemp rope was entirely incapable of bearing the load. The dry outer shell suffered a catastrophic, instantaneous structural failure. The thick rope snapped violently with a sharp, distinct tearing sound. The entire pendulum mechanism instantly disconnected from its heavy upper anchor. The sudden loss of tension transformed the thrilling horizontal swing into an immediate vertical freefall. Sarah was instantly ejected from the comfortable wooden seat. She was thrown directly into the vast, empty space above the gorge. Gravity took absolute, immediate control of her descending trajectory. The physical reality of the 100-foot plunge was mathematically precise and completely unforgiving. A human body falling freely accelerates rapidly, gaining massive kinetic energy. The resulting impact against the solid, jagged granite boulders at the bottom was clinically catastrophic. The sudden, massive deceleration generated overwhelming kinetic trauma across her entire skeletal structure. The extreme blunt force impact caused an immediate, total structural failure of the cervical spine. Her central nervous system underwent an instantaneous, completely irreversible shutdown. The catastrophic mechanical trauma forced her heart into immediate cardiac arrest. It was a perfectly non-survivable transfer of kinetic energy. She permanently lost consciousness before her brain could even fully process the terrifying sensation. High above the silent green canyon, the frayed, rotted stumps of the rope dangled uselessly. They swayed gently in the warm afternoon wind. Down below, the shattered pieces of the wooden seat rested quietly among the sharp rocks. The deep jungle quietly absorbed the sudden noise, returning instantly to its ancient natural rhythm. In every one of these cases, the superhost was more worried about a bad review than a structural integrity check. If you were staying at an Airbnb and noticed a suspicious, wobbly column or a DIY installation that didn't look right, would you actually report it, or would you stay silent to avoid the hassle and enjoy your trip? Be honest. Would you risk your life for a pleasant weekend? Comment your choice below, like if you value your life over a vacation.